Never in my life have I been so upset by a credit card. Neil and I were so excited to finally start using the Bilt rewards card to pay our rent and earn rewards at the same time. And we found out along the way that the Bilt rewards card was, well, not what we thought it was going to be. So why were we excited about paying our rent using a credit card? Well, the Bilt rewards card is one of the first of its kind. It's a credit card that allows you to pay rent with your credit card, which if you pay rent here in the US, you know that usually you can only pay it using your checking account or a checkbook, or sometimes landlords will let you use like Zelle or Venmo, but it's usually directly from your bank. So that eliminates the ability for you to, one, use other forms of payment like credit cards, and two, to be able to earn rewards, which is typically how you can get rewards when you're spending on credit cards. More importantly, the Bilt rewards card has no fees to pay rent, so that makes it really lucrative to actually use the card to pay your rent because there's no fees attached. It's really easy to use, and one of the biggest expenditures in your life you can now put on a credit card. Paying rent by direct deposit or check was something that I just became so accustomed to that I never questioned it, but it really makes no sense why I can pretty much charge everything else in my life onto a credit card but not rent. Now, I understand that landlords want to make sure that they're paid on time and there are some inherent risks to using a credit card, but there are ways to mitigate this. And so I think it's really, really cool that Bilt was able to come up with a method for people to actually pay their rent using a credit card and build their credit and earn rewards at the same time. So what was the process for getting the card? Neil decided that he would open up the account under his name and his credit and was able to fill out a form online and get the card within 15 to 20 minutes, at least a virtual working version of it. It was fast and I was seriously impressed. Everything seems to be managed through their mobile application, and then they also have a website, which the user interface seems to be pretty similar. Neil was also able to call the client services number to add me as an authorized user. Unfortunately, he had to call and couldn't do this online, and while that was a little annoying, I understand why a credit card company would want their primary holder to actually physically pick up the phone and call to add an authorized user just to make sure that their identity is verified, that it's not a scam, things like that. So while that was a bit annoying, it was actually a good security measure, I think, for adding an authorized user to a card. So we ended up getting a virtual version of the card, a virtual number on the mobile app, which we were able to use pretty much immediately. I think we used it like a couple hours later because Neil and I were in the process of moving from Durham, North Carolina to Chicago. And we had just signed our new lease, had a prorated rent amount for May to pay for. And so like a lot of managed buildings that have portals where you can pay your fee, each person on the lease gets their own portal. And Neil and I have decided in our relationship that we would split our rent 50-50. And so we had basically 2 payments of the same amount from each of our respective rent portals that we charged to the Bilt card. So there was one payment of XYZ and another payment of XYZ that we charged to the card. And so far, so good. Everything seemed to be going great. I was still a little skeptical, like, how is this actually possible? Why aren't more people doing this? Why isn't this like the norm for all credit card companies to be able to pay your rent on credit? But hey, everything was going really well so far and we hadn't run into any issues. Well, after Neil and I made that rent payment for May, I noticed something kind of weird, that the charges that we had just paid onto the card, they weren't appearing onto the transaction history, either on the mobile app or online. Now, never in my 12 years of having a credit card, even the most basic of basic credit cards from like Bank of America, have I ever seen that transactions are not posted immediately. Usually they just come up as pending, but you can see that something has been charged to the card. And I thought this was really weird and kind of fishy because it took almost 3 to 5 days for that transaction to actually appear on the app or online website for Bilt. And that just kind of strikes me as being odd because you could be theoretically charging so many different transactions and you'd have a 3-day delay at the minimum to actually see what transactions you've charged, or if someone else accidentally got your number and they charged something, it would take like 3 days for you to be able to see that. So I thought that was really weird, and I started to get kind of skeptical of using the card at this point. For our June 1st rent payment, so this was just as we had moved to Chicago, we had paid our prorated rent for May and now needed to pay our June 1st rent. So again, Neil and I paid 2 different transactions of the same amount onto the card. And of course, we couldn't see those transactions even appearing as pending on the card for a few days. And that was really unfortunate. But in the meantime, we knew how much we had each respectively charged to the card for our prorated rent for May and our June rent. And so we decided to just go ahead that weekend on June 3rd to make a payment to cover the prorated rent for May and for June. So Neil and I each made 2 respective payments onto the card, one from each of our bank accounts, to pay for the same amounts. It wasn't until Sunday, June 4th, so 4 days after making that initial June 1st rent payment, that we found out that only one of our rent payments had gone through, and that was Neil's rent payment. And the reason that we found out about this was not through the app, not through their website, but Neil had gotten a notification in his email that only one rent had posted, and apparently that's because you can only charge rent one time onto the card per month. Now, this didn't make any sense to me because, one, it wasn't really advertised and I didn't see it in the fine print, and maybe that's something I had missed, but we had also paid rent twice in May, and so it just didn't make sense that it wasn't flagged for May but was flagged for June. This wasn't what made me mad though. It was the fact that they took 4 days to notify us that one of our rent payments wasn't going to be processed. I mean, that just is really infuriating because if you pay rent, you probably know that usually landlords will give you like a 5-day grace period. And because this was already day 4, like I had 1 day left to make sure that my rent would go through, that I wouldn't be charged any late fees, and just to make sure that I notified my landlord about the issue like as soon as possible. So it really left me with like less than 24 hours to be able to figure all of this out. Additionally, Neil and I had called Bilt and tried to talk to a member of their banking team, but they only had their client services teams open on like Saturday and Sunday, and the banking team was closed on the weekend. So it was really unhelpful because client services team kept on saying we need to talk to the banking team, but the banking team was closed. So it was just kind of annoying because we couldn't figure out what was happening or get an answer and understand like why this was happening. To add to that, a couple days later, we found out that one of our payment transactions, so money that we paid onto the credit card from our bank accounts, was canceled because we had paid 2 of the same amounts from 2 different bank accounts. From this moment on, I realized I couldn't trust the Bilt Rewards credit card because not only were they going to cancel my transactions, but they were also going to cancel my payments, and it just made no sense. So I told Neil that like once the card is paid off, we're not using it, we're closing it down because this seems to be really sketchy and just not working for us and what we intended to use it for. Honestly, I'm pretty bummed that the Bilt card didn't work out for us. I think maybe it would work for just one individual that needs to pay 1 rent per month, and maybe it could still be a good card for that person. But for us, it just wasn't working out. There was too many unknowns, too many like weird fishy policies, and just the lack of transparency about being able to see when your transactions are charged, when your payments are posted, and I didn't like those features. I think if Bilt were to make the user interface and those basic banking features more available and more transparent and operate kind of more like a normal credit card, I think they would do even better. So again, all in all, I think the Bilt Rewards card is probably good for an individual, but definitely does not work for a couple that was trying to use it the way that Neil and I were trying to use it. Usually, Neil and I post videos on the pros and cons of credit cards, but because we wanted to practice what we preach, we wanted to share our true, authentic experiences using a credit card like Bilt. If you like content like this, please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment down below, and be sure to check out our other credit card videos as well. And see you next time.